We're going to do pretty abbreviated bios today, but I will read them very briefly here. So Bradley Metrock is the CEO of conversational AI company Project Voice, and he also owns and programs the annual Digital Book World, which is held in New York City. It will be January 15th through 18th in New York. And I'll be presenting there again for the second year in a row on innovation in university presses. There's a great program. I encourage you to attend if you can. We're also going to hear from Adam Hyde, who is the Coko founder and manager. He's also founder of Book Sprints, Page JS, Cabbage Tree Labs, Floss Manuals, Open Publishing Awards, and Open Publishing Fest. So he keeps pretty busy. And last but not least, Dr. Angela Lauria is the award-winning force behind the author coaching company, the Author Incubator, and the boutique nonfiction publishing imprint Difference Press. She's also a graduate of the GW. Two-time graduate.
I appreciate it, John. Thank you. I'm a big fan of John's and George Washington. I think the work that John does he's a selfless guy. He's a community-driven guy. Pooja, it's my first time getting to know her. I think they make a great team, and I'm honored to be part of this morning. So my name is Bradley Metrock. I'm CEO of Project Voice. We bring content and community to conversational AI. There's a podcast we do. I write a Substack newsletter, and we have an annual conference that we host. I also general partner of Project Voice Capital Partners. We identify and invest in early stage conversational AI companies on a quarterly basis. So I'm involved with a bunch of AI stuff, I guess, is the way to phrase that. And I also own and program Digital Book World, which I might add, we're in the process of maybe making a couple of tweaks to how that's going to work for January. I would stay tuned and pay attention to that. We're excited to deliver it for sure. So I'm going to introduce Adam Hyde with Coko. I was invited to sort of speak for a moment about AI and publishing, and I'm happy to do that. And you know, I've always been intrigued by the publishing industry. I don't consider myself part of it, even though with everything we do in Digital Book World, as well as we've published, multiple books over the years. But I've always looked at the publishing industry as something I sit on the outside of, and so that gives me the ability to not have any politics, not have opinions, that are tied to any particular entity, just to sort of say what I think. And I think that the publishing industry has got incredible opportunity in front of it, thanks to AI and everything it's bringing to the table. And it's not going to be pretty all the time. It might be messy at times, but overall, it will be a big boon. And I want to tell a quick story to illustrate that. I'm born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. And for college, I moved to Nashville, Tennessee. And it was when I was in college, I graduated from high school in 99 and went to college in 99 and 2000. And this was the time when the music industry was at war with technology over piracy. And I remember sitting in on a seminar that the songwriters who dominate Nashville, they still do. There was a songwriter seminar where songwriters came and they talked on campus to students and faculty about the perils of allowing piracy to continue. And there were several people in the room that pointed out, well, piracy does this or that might actually be beneficial. Oh, no, stop it. No, it's all bad. Well, and what's happened? The person who gave that seminar, who is still a national songwriter, I remember very clearly he was impassioned that day and very upset about the threat that piracy brought to his industry and his career and his profession and his livelihood. 25 years in the future, that person is richer than they've ever been thanks to Spotify and the streaming industry that arose as a direct result out of piracy. And I think that illustration is valuable, not to say something is ethical or unethical. That's for somebody else to decide, not me. All I'm doing is pointing out that out of uncertainty and ambiguity brought to our doorstep by technology, positive things can happen where maybe they weren't anticipated. So as you enter this conference today, that's been very carefully and thoughtfully and passionately crafted for you by the team at George Washington, I invite you to maybe sideline your preconceived notions on how the next few years are going to go, and instead embrace an ocean of opportunity and the fact that we as human beings never know how it's going to go. So and that's exciting. That's part of what makes this life. So we're honored to have y'all here. I'm honored to be part of this. And with no further ado, I'm going to introduce Adam Hyde of Coko to get us started with this part of the program.
Yeah, kia ora. Adam Hyde. I'm resident in New Zealand, presenting from Auckland, and it's like 2 a.m. or so. So got lots of coffee inside me to keep me going, but I'm very grateful to be invited here to speak. John and Paul couldn't make it, so I'm presenting sort of a group piece. And I can just briefly run through that for you now. So what I want to talk about is AI in publishing, and talking about categorization structures for understanding AI. So as a background, John, myself, and Paul, we all have been involved in scholarly publishing for a long time. And so in scholarly publishing, AI is posed special problems for the industry, I think, which is potentially quite different to the rest of the publishing industry and how they view AI. So I want to dive into a little bit about that. It's essentially like AI and scholarly publishing. So this is based on an article that we wrote, Initial Scholarly AI Taxonomy. And you can find this on the Upstream site. It's a Force 11 publishing channel. Okay, so I guess we all know that, you know, AI and machine learning, etc., various associated technologies have been around for a while. But in November 22, the release of GPT-4 sort of stimulated a new era of awareness about AI and its potential role in various aspects of our life. And so we're sort of focusing on that point. We're not trying to make draw out the history of AI. We're just taking this moment as the beginning of a new conversation. And we've certainly seen that arise within scholarly publishing. And it's been very interesting to observe. And while the rest of the world was really worried about, you know, catastrophizing what AI could do, and there was also obviously a lot of talk about potential for good. But there was a lot of discussion, and it seems to have dwindled, although it persists, about how AI could, you know, destroy the world, destroy humanity. And in the scholarly world, essentially, they were worried about the end of the world for them was questions around authorship, right? So there was a lot of discussion about, and really knee-jerk reactions, I think, about the threat that large language models pose to the authorship model and the idea of authorship. And of course, scholarly publishing has really arisen or has elevated the notion of the author as the genius. And so the idea is that the LLM kind of dilutes this, right? I think that's kind of fundamental to this concern. And so there's a lot of discussion about authorship. And if you look at the Nature editorial policies, they really spell it out large that they don't accept LLMs as being participants in the authorship of content for publication. So, and this is, I find this interesting, but I'll just let it rest here. The main thing about it is that there has been quite a widespread response like this throughout the scholarly publishing world. The other big concern was about so-called hallucinations, right? About the fact that facts can't be trusted if they come out of the mouth, so to speak, of a large language model. And so you're really playing with fire is kind of like the overtone. And, once again, looking at Nature, I don't mean to pick at Nature. This was a conversation and is still a conversation. It's just, there's a lot of weariness and it's fair to some extent, but essentially, this sense of playing with fire, if you're utilizing a large language model to help you author scholarly material, you're really playing with fire. You could undermine your credibility, I guess, is one of them, by thinking that you're collaborating, so to speak, with something that actually has a firm hold on reality. You're not, and that's, so you put yourself at peril. You're actually at risk of undermining your own credibility by publishing materials which are, essentially not factful. So these two elements being quite strong in the scholarly publishing world. And then it all comes down to, at the end of the day, this question about trust. Can you trust the scholarly record and those that produce it? And the whole ecosystem relies on trust. There are many flaws to scholarly publishing, but they like to see themselves as, peer review. The whole model is really based around being able to trust that the content that appears before you has been critiqued and validated. And if you don't know who the author is because a robot has participated in this, and possibly a robot that sort of doesn't really understand the real facts of the situation, then of course this could undermine trust in the article you're consuming, but also in the scholarly record at large. So it's it's kind of, there's some truth in all these things, but it has to be saying that these conversations, I think, got off a little bit too quickly and went a little bit too far, and they still persist. So John and Paul and I, we basically saw this happening very fast, and so we thought, well, this feels a little bit like it's getting a little carried away. So we are all technologists, and we all work within scholarly publishing, and so we thought, and we know the value of these kinds of tools, a little bit about their history, and we've used them. Of course, it's not safe to say that anyone knows the value of AI even to date. There's of course varying opinions about its capacity and how it can be used, and where it should and shouldn't be used. But we have, I think, something of a soberish view in that we see it as a tool, and that we're interested in exploring LLMs as tools, particularly in the scholarly publishing workflow. So our point was to make a very simple point by writing an article that says it's not all about authorship or facts, that we need to see this current moment of AI and what's to come as a generalized tool, right? So if we're going to then accept that and talk about AI in publishing, we have to think about the roles that AI can play in the publishing workflow, not just throw it all about a discussion about authorship and trust, but AI has many different roles. So we need to identify those roles, and then only at that point we sort of put on some guardrails for the conversation about ethics, right? So there may be meaningful conversations to be had about authorship and ethics in publishing, scholarly publishing, but AI is not just about authorship. So, let's first of all identify the arena and then discuss the ethics from there. So we came up with initial scholarly AI taxonomy. It's very high level, and it's not meant to be exhaustive. This is just a way of exhibiting that there's another way of thinking about the role of AI, right? In that, rather than sort of get into the emotional conversations about authorship, it would be interesting to create a taxonomy and zoom out and then think about it from this point of view. And it has in the hope that it has a kind of somewhat of a neutralizing or effect, so that we can actually apply a taxonomy and examine each of these elements and then have the discussion within them. Now, I think actually, since we've written this, I think the main point I think that's important is not to have a scholarly AI taxonomy, generalized or a universal one, or even a specific one, but have the mindset of thinking about AI in this way when you're approaching a domain, right? So abstract out to a taxonomy that makes sense to you and try and make it have some sort of like simple root forms that make sense, and then start thinking about it from there forward. So the first list of ideas that we came up with were extract, validate, generate, analyze, reformat, discover, translate, right? Has been this taxonomy. And I'll run through these items very quickly. Extract is the ability for AI to identify and isolate specific entities or data points within the content. So this is, in scholarly publishing, you need to extract various data from a manuscript. It's very useful for the scholarly record to be able to do this. And it also can lead to other interesting information, like you may be able to identify from these entities that there's other data sets that should possibly be provided with the manuscript, etc. So it's an interesting question if LLMs can play a functional, helpful role in the extraction of these kinds of entities. So that was one point. The validation, verify the accuracy and reliability of the information. And this is not to say that AI or LLMs of any specific type, any particular LLM, does a good job on any of these. There are a lot of factors that come into play. The technology and how you've set it up being one part of that. But, it's just to say that they can play this role. It might be good or bad, right? So let's just identify the role and then talk about it. So validate, verify the accuracy and reliability of the information is obviously an interesting role that LLMs can play in scholarly publishing. Generate, this is the one that people go to first. It's basically around authorship, but we like to zoom out and call it generate because authorship and the generation of content and ideas are not necessarily the same thing. Authorship may be seen as being a subset of this. So it kind of, that's what I mean by sort of neutralizing the conversation somewhat. It's easier to look at the idea of AI playing a role of generation and talk about that rather than it is to talk about it as being an author. That gets into muddier waters in our opinion. Next, analyze, examine patterns or relationships or trends within the information. I think that speaks for itself. Reformatting, modifying and adjusting the information to fit specific formats. So this is actually like this could be, in a sense, like, as we all know, you can write a text and then ask a LLM to format it in a size fit for social media in various contexts. That would be a reformatting role. But reformatting might be also to adjust it for a specific reading level or domain, right? So it's kind of reinterpreting is also what we were thinking about here. So discover, search for local relevant and locate relevant information or connections. We use this AI a lot for this, and I think a lot of people do on a day-to-day basis. And of course, the connection to the internet is one question. Some of the large foundational models are connected, some aren't. So that this becomes a different kind of experience according to that capacity. But nevertheless, we do use it to search even the historical content that they have absorbed for relevant information. And then lastly, to translate, convert from one language to another might be an interesting one. So this is the kind of the taxonomy. It's just very simple. It's not meant to be a landmark exercise. It's just meant to be a very simple point to say that rather than rushing in deeply into these very muddy waters of authorship and trust of the scholarly record, we should maybe zoom out first and see AI as a generalized tool that can play many roles in scholarly publishing, identify the high-level abstractions, the sort of primitives, and think about those as they apply to scholarly publishing in a more neutral way. And then from there, iterate forward, think about how they are used, whether they're good or bad, and what the ethics of that may or may not be. So our conclusion is that, just as I said, we should use this, use a taxonomy as a process, I guess, for understanding AI and thinking about AI and its role in publishing. And if we can do this, I think we can learn to value it in a more interesting way, rather than being embedded in these discussions that do get quite carried away with regard to whether AI is something that should be recognized as an author or whether it can be trusted on a factual basis. Yeah, so that's it. Thank you.
Adam, thank you very much, and appreciate Adam Hyde of Coko. I had a typo on what I was reading earlier. Adam, thank you for being part of this with us, and especially in the wee hours where you are. So we're grateful for you. So next up is Angela Lauria talking about AI assisted accessibility, and I'll introduce her with a little bit of an anecdote as well. So in the news this week is a story about Amazon Alexa, which is my first touch point with AI several years ago. And the story that's out in the media is that Alexa, when asked about the January 6th events, gives a bunch of misinformation. This is how the Washington Post reported on this yesterday, I think. And this follows, there's a long history of questionable information coming out of this ecosystem. Going back many years ago, there was stories that came out pretty much in parallel that the left and right both took umbrage with, in which Alexa answered the question, "Who is Jesus Christ?" by saying he's a fictitious character, and then answer the question, "Who is Hillary Clinton?" with some very unpleasant language. And Amazon has used the same formula to address that over the years. They've just gone to the lab and they've fixed it. And but nevertheless, there's been conflict, there's been problems, people have been upset about that. But despite all of that, Alexa has given us some of the most interesting and valuable accessibility use cases of any AI tool so far. And one of them that I talk about frequently when I give talks on this is, Alexa, what am I holding? So, and I'm probably setting off your Amazon device if you have one, so sorry. But Alexa, what am I holding? If you have an Alexa device that has a screen on it, people who are low vision or no vision can use that, and they can have a product with a barcode, and it'll use the camera and scan it. It'll tell you what you're holding, and if it can reorder it, you can reorder it. Or if it doesn't have a barcode, it'll scan it and try to tell you what you're holding, you know, Shazam, like machine learning style. And that has been very, very powerful for people with low vision and no vision, to the point where that is a dominant use case for why those devices are bought in the first place. So the point here is that it's a confusing and ambiguous landscape right now within AI. You have systems and frameworks and tools that can cause problems over here and solve them over here. And I think it's interesting, and it sort of sets the stage for a conversation about accessibility and how important that is to all of us. So with that, I'm thrilled to hear all that Angela Lauria is doing, and I'm thrilled to hear her presentation. I'm going to turn it over to her.
And we never made it on a call, probably because of the New Zealand timeline. But if I could have asked for a better setup, that would be it exactly. I think when we are talking about the ethics, I think when we're talking about the ethics of AI and publishing, that taxonomy is super helpful to approach it. The other part of the ethics equation is what's being left out. If we're focusing just, and I'm not saying these things aren't important to focus on, but if we're focusing on the authorship conversation and the hallucination conversations, both of which are very key, that is also distracting us from another conversation, which is who can, my presentation is taking a dive, who can be more included because of AI. And that story about Alexa and low vision is actually where I want to start my conversation, which is God would not be, in fact, dead if it were not for some early AI. About 150 years ago, Nietzsche went blind, had some ideas about what Zarathustra was going to thus spake, and the will to power. And he could not write these books because he could not see any longer. And he was living in Italy. A friend came over and said, I have the solution. It's technology. And this, the Malin Hansen writing ball, was the earliest typewriter. This is from 1881-ish or so. And for Nietzsche, the typewriter was an assistive aid to give him access to something that he had lost when he lost his sight. And we can think of that like a spell board might give an autistic person their voice back now. This was the most cutting edge technology. And what Nietzsche noticed, he wrote of his 14 books, depending on how you count, half of them were written, by the way, I'm standing here because of the sun being blinding. So thank you for moving the camera. So he actually wrote about half of his books with a typewriter. And what he noticed is that the typewriter itself changed how he thought. And that is what happens with AI too. And you've probably noticed this, you write differently if you're writing by hand, if you're writing with a typewriter, for those of us who are old enough to remember those days. And then if you're writing with word processing, where you can move things around really quickly, our thinking actually evolves and changes. And Nietzsche actually wrote about that. He said, our writing tools are also working on our thoughts. So when we have had technological shifts, like, for instance, the typewriter, but this also happened obviously with the printing press, with the internet, and many other technological innovations. Those innovations, everybody immediately comes up with all of the reasons why they're terrible. Everybody is the people currently in power. See the Luddites for details. So what happens is you have accumulated a certain amount of power and a new technology is coming in to threaten it. Your brain naturally and cognitively is going to come up with all these terrible things that are going to happen. And that's what's happening over at Nature and in many places right now. It's not that none of that is true or interesting. It's just that it is also distracting from the people to whom are about to get some of the power you are about to lose. So I want to point you guys to a couple of pieces of interesting cutting edge research that's come out in the last couple months. Generative AI at Work by Eric Brindleson, Danielle Lee, and Lindsay Raymond from Stanford, I think. They published this with the National Bureau of Economic Research, and it is not publishing research, but I think it informs the work that we should be doing around accessibility now. They did a study, I won't give you all the details, but what they found is AI actually doesn't really help highly skilled workers all that much. Turns out, it's all right. Maybe gives a 2-3% productivity boost. But where it gives a huge productivity boost are people who have had less education and less training. So this study was done with customer service. You probably all dealt with the customer service reps. So customer service reps using chat, often in countries where they were not serving the population that was asking the questions, so less familiar with cultural context and things like that. And when they were able to empower them with AI, a whole bunch of interesting things happened. So customer satisfaction went way up, job satisfaction went way up, people got promotions, people made more money. And we watched the highly skilled workers in that company who use the exact same tools having not those same amazing results. Over at MIT, Saked Noy and Whitney Zhang have a piece called Experimental Evidence. This is not peer-reviewed yet, but I believe it is in the peer review process. Experimental Evidence on Productivity Effects and Generative AI. And again, they're talking about college-educated professionals completing incentivized writing tasks. And the participants assigned to use ChatGPT were more productive, efficient, and enjoyed the task more. But participants with weaker skills benefited the most from ChatGPT, which carries ethical implications. And here they're talking about policy implications for efforts to reduce productivity and inequality through AI. So we took that at Difference Press at my publishing company, and we started doing some work with our authors because, as hopefully if you're here, you know, traditional publishing has been plagued by systematic racism, patriarchy, and many other forms of marginalization. If you follow the hashtag publishing paid me, you can actually see the financial implications and consequences of that marginalization. Haben Girma, who is a deafblind lawyer from Harvard who has an amazing memoir, talks about how disability has led to technological innovations and how they really benefit all of us. The quote I have here is, "Disability is part of the human experience. We need to all engage in our work to make the world more accessible to everyone. Inclusion is a choice." And that very short sentence, inclusion is a choice, is the ethical dilemma that I think AI is presenting us with, which people in power would like us to not pay any attention to right now. The gatekeeping has excluded traditionally marginalized voices from being able to write and publish results. It's also resulted in them making less money off of their intellectual property, which then often gets appropriated by the people who do have access to that power. So, this talks about the ethical issues, but I think Adam did a great job of talking about those. So I want to talk about how does AI promote inclusion and access. So we did our work primarily with neurological neurodivergence. So AI authors, autistic authors, and dyslexic authors is where most of our research has been, and also with a chronically ill population. So authors with Ehlers-Danlos and fibromyalgia participated in the studies that I have done with our authors. And what we found are a few different things, and I have an appendix here, so I think you'll be able to get the slides on the website that talks about some of the specific findings. So for different disabilities, there are different aspects of AI, and in my book, which is called The Equalizing Quill, I actually have a very similar taxonomy to the one Adam presented, like uncannily similar. And different disabilities hit different pieces of those taxonomies. Very rarely is it generate where our authors were needing to spend the most time. Sometimes, but very, very rarely. Our dyslexic authors probably spent the most time there. And even in that case, that's only one piece of it. They're obviously not just generating and walking away from their book. So I do think another Hobbin quote here, but when you design for accessibility, you literally pave the way for better innovation for the entire community. Her story here about curb cuts in San Francisco, which were lobbied hard for by people in wheelchairs, obviously benefits a whole lot of moms with strollers in San Francisco, bikers, and those roving delivery carts they now have, the automated delivery carts. Curb cuts benefit everyone. We are going to find this with AI. The more we lean into the disabled community, the more we'll develop these tools in a way that help everyone. So the areas the areas with our chronically ill population focused on the spoon theory, so how much energy they had and were able to write. Whereas with our neurodivergent population, it was more about being able to get their ideas out in a way that were more accessible to more readers. And a lot of the social emotional learning issues that come with being neurodivergent, feelings of imposter syndrome as one example of that, and being able to validate and check their information with AI was really helpful. The one thing at the core of the work we do with our authors, and this is where, to me, I don't know, the heart of authorship really lies, is What is Good Thinking, the book by Martin Heidegger. And we focus on the thinking behind. Actually generating a sentence is not all that authorship is. And so being able to work with AI to get that structure and the order and the arguments being written in a way that can be processed and understood more quickly by readers. Iteration aided in the organization. So our ADHD clients who came to us probably saw the biggest impact, because what we found with so many of our ADHD authors is that they have these ideas, but they're coming at them so fast because of that highly connected brain structure where there are so many ideas and so many connection points that they really structured to organize their thoughts, and would often quit on their books or their pieces because they weren't able to make those connections. With AI, we were able to streamline that, turn it into multiple pieces, organize their writing, and therefore organizing their thinking. So when you put together the Nietzsche revelation that the typewriter was actually going to change how you think, and this Heidegger quote, "We never come to thoughts, they come to us," you can see how, especially with neurodivergent populations, how we can get higher level thinking and solutions to problems and more creative output that we weren't able to access without AI. So So yes, I believe the future of accessible publishing does require us leaning into AI as an accessibility aid. And obviously we do have ethical risks that also need to be considered. But inclusion is what is going to benefit all of us. And that is really what I wanted to share. I will just flip you through this. These are some of the things that we did with our authors. Rheumatoid arthritis, which is often comorbid. Are we not supposed to say comorbid? I can't remember the right way of saying that. Co-occurring with autism. So we have a lot of our autistic authors also dealing with rheumatoid arthritis. Our dyslexic authors, really a lot of imposter syndrome that we were able to work with, and being willing to share their work with editors, which was a big thing that was holding our dyslexic authors back. We have one author we worked with dystonia, who really struggled just to be able to sit and write for more than 15 minutes a day. And we were able to work with her to get that integrated into a workflow that worked for her. ADHD, again, this is where we had the most authors and saw the most results. Our autistic authors really struggle with how their ideas are perceived. And we were able to spend time on that double empathy gap so that when they would write something, they could also work with AI to see how it would likely be interpreted by more holistic or neurotypical brains. And also because of autistic people's monotropic focus, they really struggle with getting concepts out in a way that are understandable. So AI helped with simplifying some of those complex pattern matching skills. We did have one author we worked with in this first study, which was about 14 authors in this first group. So low vision, I think legally blind, but not completely blind. Obviously, huge ways AI can help there. And then apraxia and aphasia. So those authors really were able to use more text to speech. And that was really interesting. For those experiments, we used Otter AI. And then we're able to take Otter and work with our editors directly. They had enough to work with that our editors can use it. And then one other area is traumatic brain injuries. So we've had several authors in this group with traumatic brain injuries who have some cognitive disabilities. And we were able to use scanning, so optical character recognition of journals of their journey, and then really enhance some of those cognitive gaps using AI by filtering through that. So there is a lot more, obviously, in the book. If you want a free copy, my email address is up there, angela@differencepress.com, and you could reach out. I would be happy to get you a copy of this book. And if any of you are working with populations that are thinking about AI as an accessibility tool, I am happy to collaborate on those projects. We are excited about what's possible. That's it. Thank you.
All right.
Angela, that was it.
Questions? Go ahead. Go ahead, Bradley.
Oh, yeah. No, I was just gonna say that was an excellent presentation. And you know, I love the name of the book, by the way, The Equalizing Quill. I thought that everything about that was excellent. Yeah, John, if there's questions, we happy to take that. Otherwise, it could yield some time back to you. The only last thing I had to say is just simply, I got to make sure I'm looking at my camera. I'm tempted to look at the one above it. If you look up thankless job in the dictionary, you find event organizers. There's a picture of event organizers in the dictionary. Look it up. Don't take my word for it. I promise it's there. Look closely. The work that y'all have done, John, Pooja, everybody on your team, to put this thing together, it's been fun to watch. So these two presentations already to kick us off, they were both excellent. People who are grateful for those, grateful for the other work that you've done, grateful for being part of this event. I encourage those people, virtual or physical, to come up to you and tell you. So hopefully they'll do that. Thank you for having me involved.
Thanks. We have some questions in the room. Go ahead. All right.
So a little bit of housekeeping here. And hopefully that works. Just use the whole thing. The speakers. Okay, a whole room full of people whispering. All right. So one of the beautiful logistics of working in a room that has a lot of technology and a lot of Zoom setups is, in order for our online participants to hear all of the questions, they have to be spoken into this tiny little mic that I'm holding. And so I'm going to be handling all of the questions from the in-room as well as from online. We have one comment from the online community, and then we're going to get to our first question. And this is coming through the interact button. So if you'd like to interact and share anything with our online participants or with the about 30 of us here in the room in Arlington, this is just one comment from an attendee saying, with every respect, please don't define people by a health complication. For example, autistic author versus authors with autism. Diabetics are people with diabetes, personhood first, and then any uniqueness, which is a really important distinction to make as we deepen these conversations. So I just want to
And I always start with autism first, and that is because it very specifically saves lives. So person with diabetes makes sense because your diabetes is not a part of your identity, and you almost certainly would like the diabetes to go away. Autism, however, is a neurotype. It is a different type of brain. So it's sort of like saying brown-eyed person. I don't really want to change my brown eyes. I don't want to change my autism. And we have many studies, and I would be happy to send them to the person who interacted. Thank you so much. I know that your intention for sure was to represent people and not associate them with a disease or a disorder. Great news, autism is not a disease or a disorder. It is a cultural neurotype. So, and feel free to listen to the Autistic Culture podcast for more on that. So,
thank you so much for that. I'm just going to turn on my my video so folks don't have yet another disembodied voice joining them. We have one more question here coming through the live stream. And I think this is a question for all of our panelists. So how would you recommend adapting a policy on using AI tools to include allowance of these tools for accessibility versus LLMs for authorship and peer review? What is the accepted wording for these tools, for example?
So this is a great question for Adam. I don't know if he's still around. I'm happy to answer it, but I also think his taxonomy answers it beautifully.
Yeah, hi, I'm still here. Great presentation, Angela. Sorry, could you ask that again? I didn't quite get it.
Adam, were you saying you didn't quite hear the question?
Yeah, I didn't quite hear it. No.
Yeah, I think the question was, would you want to repeat it, Pusha?
I'll try with the risk of you having to turn the volume down again.
Okay.
John and I are ballet dancers, really. The question verbatim is, how would you recommend adapting a policy on using AI tools to include allowance of these tools for accessibility versus LLMs for authorship and peer review? What is the accepted wording for these tools, for example?
Well, that's a tricky one. I'm afraid I don't have off the bat a ready-made answer for you. Yes, I think I'm going to have to take a pass on this and think further about it. My apologies. Yeah.
I think from my perspective, it is Adam's taxonomy. I'm calling it Adam's taxonomy now. The Coko taxonomy is a great place to start. So the biggest thing with how we think about LLMs is it's not on or off. It's not binary. And I 100% think if somebody is just typing into ChatGPT, write a paper about something and make it look researched and please cite things randomly, like that is obviously not going to get through a peer review process. My experience of working with authors is that we can customize these tools and tap into different aspects of that taxonomy. So you're not, the way I'm talking about it is not, are we using an LLM or not? We are all already using it all the time. Hello, text a friend. You're already using AI. It is everywhere. It is going to be more and more incorporated. And our job as publishers and being part of the publishing industry is really understanding where we're using it and where we're not using it. It's sort of like saying, should we use computers for writing our papers? Like, yes, but that doesn't tell you everything about the computer. So that said, my first job was writing people's dissertations illegally. I got paid $10 a page. Got me through grad school, just saying. So probably not the right way to use a computer to write your paper, but it did work for someone.
I'll interject one thing here as well. So to the person who wrote that question, I would suggest taking a look at the AI Act that's been recently over the summer ratified in different parts of Europe. And that's going to be in all likelihood the framework for us here in the United States on how we put language around the concepts that we're trying to protect. And it's a good place to start. And one thing in particular, asking about the language that we use, data provenance is the term for LLMs or any other AI tool being able to tell us, where did you get this information? Maybe I like the information you gave me, maybe I don't like it, but in all circumstances, I want to know where it came from. Data provenance is important in almost every single policy that we make around this stuff. And it's part of the AI Act as well. So start there in answering this question. Go Google that and take a look at what they've done over there.
We've got a couple questions in the room. And I just invite, as you ask your question, this tiny corded mic, my leash, please announce your full name and where you're joining us from.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Ani Mahapatra with American Society for Microbiology. I loved your talk. I think you've covered like so many aspects of accessibility. I wanted to ask a question about another meaning of accessibility, and that is the actual access to these AI tools. And these are most of these are created by for-profit companies who are releasing sort of light versions for the general public, but are now, their more powerful tools are being put behind subscription models. And as we're seeing this, they're probably going to push this forward with that barrier to this tool reaching out to all the people who could do wonderful things with it. So I wonder if you have any thoughts around that.
Yeah, I'm trying to, I'm going to turn this volume up just in case. Hold on, we'll see. Yeah, from my perspective, we actually did use a fairly expensive custom tool with the authors that we ran through this program in early 2023. That's called Jasper. And I do think, at least from our perspective as a publishing company, it's our job, and we have basically bought everything. So I think we probably have 20 subscriptions right now, and we give access to our authors and editors through them. But it is exactly what happened with the machines. Like, go back and listen to some of the Luddite Revolution stuff with what happened with the looms and the weavers, because people in power are going to try and impose barriers and keep that equipment out of the hands of people who will benefit from it. And they are going to construct these somewhat legitimate arguments about authorship, or I don't know, the singularity or whatever we're going to worry about, and just know what's happening is a larger question of how do we make sure that more BIPOC and marginalized people don't get access to these tools. So I think as publishers, obviously there's been such a movement to diversity in publishing. I think all publishers need to really invest in AI and empowering and educating the authors they do work with, so that, the revolution spreads faster.
I'd love to throw one more thing at the person who asked that too. Just thank you for turning that off so it doesn't echo in there. It's not just about paywalls necessarily. So Amazon, to use them as an example, has said we're contemplating the idea of putting a paywall behind Alexa, which I think would be a massive mistake. But if you go back 6 or 7 years ago to the dawn of the Alexa era, just to use this as an example, there was no paywall. Obviously, yes, the smart speakers had a cost, but they were pretty heavily subsidized. Even despite all of that, it was noted by a lot of people in our culture that Amazon's inherent customer base, being known to be more educated, more affluent than other vendors or other ecosystems, by itself created a gulf between haves and have-nots for Alexa, which has been demonstrated to be very valuable for children to have exposure to, at least to some degree. So even without a paywall, equity issues can still exist, just for the record, and we've already seen that in a huge, huge way with Alexa.
Okay, thank you very much. So my name is Damian Hess. I am from Amazon Web Services. But I really appreciate what Adam and Angela you're saying, especially the focus on looking at AI as a tool that can be extremely beneficial, but it needs to be used responsibly and ethically. I have, though, seen from a lot of publishers hesitancy in adopting AI, and I think this is what everyone is beginning to talk about and how they can overcome some of the concerns. But I did want to get your reaction to one concern that they have is, even if AI is a beneficial tool, the large language models were developed by using input from other authors, right, that have been scraped from the web with or without consent. Not all models, but let's face it, it has been a problem of that data attribution, knowing what trained the model. So that is something that's going to be having to, publishers need to address that. And also there's going to be some legal battles over this. So I just wonder, what is your take on the use of generative AI in a responsible manner if these questions of how the tool was developed haven't been settled yet?
Yeah, from my perspective, what I think is most interesting about this question is how you're using it. So when you're just generating text, I think it really matters that like this database is there and we've stolen from authors and artists for sure. When you are using it to, what we spend a lot of our time on is developing thesis statements. We spend a lot of time on developing outlines. And so I am autistic. I am amazing at pattern matching. My special interest has been books since I wrote my first book at 7. So I have been writing books forever. And I can come up with a thesis statement in 10 seconds for almost anything. I am an AI, right? Not artificial autistic intelligence, right? So I can do that. And I am tapping into that body of information. I just happen to be able to tap into it faster. So if we're using AI to develop an outline, I'm just sort of sharing my superpower. Like now more people have access to that thing I can naturally do. Like I've seen brain maps of my brain when I'm doing an outline compared to neurotypical people. It is very different. I'm connecting lots of things, which is the neural network that LLMs are built on. So I think we have to be very careful when we're generating text that we're using. Very rarely do my authors do that, not never. But I think we need to lean more heavily into the other ways of using AI. My Heidegger chapter in the book goes into this much more, but it's using AI to develop that connected thinking, organized thinking that is going to, so what is called thinking is the essay from Heidegger. And he says, thinking is thanking, that we cannot think, we can't express something till we think it, and we can't think it until we fully appreciate it. And I think AI helps us appreciate it by organizing our thoughts and seeing those connections and understanding how to streamline it. Generating content is the problem, but is it bad that all that content's in there? I don't think it's bad that all the content's in my head. So, and people other than me are working on watermarking and attribution and citations, and it's already getting better and we're a minute in. So let's not kill the messenger, like.
Yeah, I'd like to add something to that. Like, I think this moment is really pointing out the limitations of copyright, I think. And, I think copyright is largely a business model mechanism. And will you still hear me? Or? Yep. Okay, cool. And I think, like, when you look at scientific literature, for example, I'm very much involved in the open access side of things, right? Which is the ability to reuse content. And I think AI, large language models, represents an amazing opportunity to comb through a lot of literature and perhaps come up with some new interpretations of that, which might be useful. And so I think in the world of open access scientific publishing, which in scientific publishing has long been stunted by a lot of problems around the business model centered around copyright, which has actually slowed down in my opinion, the progress of science. It's a very expensive and slow process of publishing within subscription journals, which then limits who can actually access and read that information. But open access models really are born to this moment, I think, where this information can be interpreted by large language models and maybe lead a way forward to new interesting research directions. So yeah, I think that's really interesting to me. What does it mean for copyright actually, and does it present another moment to challenge that and consider what the value is of being able to shed copyright and make content reusable. Yeah.
All right. Well, we want to thank Adam and Angela and Bradley for a great first session. Thank you so much, Adam, for joining us from New Zealand.